This is Dan Handford, and you're listening to the Passive Investor Show.
The views and opinions provided on this show are for informational purposes only and should not be misinterpreted as an offer to buy or sell any securities or to make or consider any investment or course of action. For more information, please go to passiveinvestorshow.com.
And now, the Passive Investor Show. Here's your host, John Fortes.
Welcome, PI listeners, to the Passive Investor Show. I'm the Passive Investor Consultant, John Fortes, your host of the only ranked podcast for passive investors in multifamily syndications and real estate funds. Our goal and purpose of this show is to be a resource to investors and help them master their passive investments by beating inflation 1% at a time. I'm excited to bring Dan Handford on the show today. And Dan, I've bumped into him through several conferences. He runs a successful virtual conference. If you haven't checked it out, I believe there's plenty coming out in the future, especially this next January. Before we continue on with the show, let me dive into a little bit about Dan's background. Dan and his wife, Danae, along with their 4 children, 3 girls and a boy, and a standing poodle, reside and work in Columbia, South Carolina. Dan is one of the managing partners with PassiveInvesting.com, which is a national passive apartment investment firm based on the Carolinas. He has led his apartment syndication company to acquire 2,200 plus units with a portfolio valued over $274 million. He is also a passive apartment investor himself in 4,800 plus units in 21 different syndication investments located across the Southeast USA and Texas. Prior to getting started investing in real estate, Dan had an extensive background in starting multiple 7-figure businesses from scratch, including a large group of non-surgical orthopedic medical clinics located in South Carolina. Dan is also the founder of Multifamily Investor Nation, #MFIN, where he provides free multifamily education to a nationwide group of over 26,000 members. The #MFIN has 50 plus meetup groups across the country that meets on the first Monday of every month. Dan, thank you for coming on the show.
Glad to be here, John. Looking forward to providing some value to your audience here.
Appreciate you. Before we get started, can you tell us a little about your background and how you got to where you are today?
Sure. So I basically, when I was starting these medical clinics and, got to a point where they were cash flowing very nicely and, of course, paying lots of money to the government in taxes at the same time, and trying to find a way to be able to not have to pay as much money in taxes. And that's when I started kind of doing a lot of research inside of real estate. And so decided about 1.5 years, 2 years into doing some research that I was going to step away from the full-time practice operations and promote my COO at the time to the CEO. And I stepped out of the operations full-time and went full-time into really multifamily real estate. So when I was doing research on it, I was kind of looking at single-family, multifamily, some commercial, all the kinds of different types of commercial, like self-storage and, all kinds of stuff. And really, fell in love with the multifamily side of it because of a lot of the recession-proofness of it, if you will, and also the tax advantages. And so hired my first mentor right out of the space, started doing some passive investing first, and then started going into doing some of the active syndications. And even right now, I'm currently invested in 23 different passive investments myself personally with 9 different operators. And then actually by the end of July, I'll be in another 2. So I'm still looking at other investment opportunities. Even though our group PassiveInvesting.com puts together our own projects and things like that, there's certain points in time throughout the year where we don't have an opportunity to be able to put money into my own deals. So I look for other operators that I know, like, and trust and invest with them as well.
An investor, a successful syndicator is always moving their money and working with other syndicators as well. I found that to be the norm literally in the industry. Mm-hmm. So Dan, you started passive investing, and that's basically how everybody gets started before they start taking on the syndication hat. When did you start working with passive investors?
So once I started to get that mentor, about 9 months in is when we closed our very first deal that we put together on ourselves. So our first couple of deals, we obviously were co-partnering with other groups to be able to kind of build our track record, build our, not just with the investors, but also to build our track record with the sellers and the brokers in those markets that we were trying to go after, so that we would have some additional credibility to be able to acquire some properties, to be able to win some of these deals. And so when we started working with our passive investors, obviously I would work with some of them on some of those other deals that we had done, but on our own deal, I guess it was probably about 7 months in, because we closed that deal about 9 months in, but 7 months in is obviously when we released the deal to the investors and started to raise funds. And, it was definitely a challenging first raise, but, we've definitely grown past that now and, have raised some pretty significant capital over the last 12 months.
So going forward, when an investor reaches out to you guys, what is your onboarding process like now?
Sure. So one of the things that we really try to do is we try to put ourselves in the investor's shoes and how they want to be treated. And that's one of the reasons why I'm a passive investor with several different groups, is because I want to see how are other operators treating their investors, and what can I do to improve my communication or improve my relationship really when it comes to our investors. And we really truly value our investors as a relationship and not just a number. And one of the things that we do is whenever you go to our website, so if you went to passiveinvesting.com and you filled out our investor form, we would actually have a phone call with you. And we don't just send you to a link or a form or whatever to fill out to schedule a call. My assistant actually will call you personally and say, hey, I'm Ann, I'm Dan's personal assistant, wanted to see about scheduling you to have a one-on-one conversation with him to discuss your investment goals. And so instead of just throwing a form in front of them to do that, we try to just take it one step further and try to have a little bit more of a personal touch with our investors. And then from there, I'll have a phone call with our investors and kind of walk them through and talk them through the process. But even before I get on a call with them, they'll get a video from us that will say, it's about a 7 to 9 minute video that each one of the partners talks about their background and experience and where they are inside the partnership as to where they actually focus. And so that the investors already know that going into the phone call, and we can focus more about what their goals are and what they're trying to look at from an outcome perspective when they're doing their investments. And then from there, we try to have some ongoing communication. So just like a lot of other groups, we do a monthly email to update our investors on where we are with everything. And then whenever we have an opportunity, of course, we release that to the investors via email. But for those of you who are watching on video, we actually have this right here, which is a newsletter that we send out to our investors. It's a nice kind of 12-page newsletter. You can see there's a little bit of a coloring page in this one. We send out to them for their children if they have those that want to color something, kind of involve the family. And we have, just a really nice full gloss, brochure in here, and talks about various things that we feel like the passive investors have some questions about and have concerns about. And we've gotten some great feedback from that, because there's a lot of people that are investing, but they don't know 100% about different things. And to give you an example, you talk about preferred returns, and some people know what preferred returns are, but a lot of passive investors, especially when they're getting started, don't know what it is. And then even people who are experienced don't even know how these different preferred returns can be structured. And this is an article I wrote for the June 2020 newsletter, and we talk about cumulative versus non-cumulative preferred returns. We talk about what's a true preferred return, what's a preferred return with operator catch-up, and what's the difference between a preferred return and preferred equity, and what happens. Are there any situations where a preferred return could completely go away in a deal? And so we talk through that, and we also do some nice little custom graphics and things like that on our newsletter, so that we can have some visualizations for our investors. So we really try to get to that point of being able to be that educational resource for our investors and provide as much value as we can, so that they can feel comfortable, moving forward with one of our investments into the future.
I think that's beautiful. I love the newsletter. Now, what is something you had to implement on your business as a result of working with passive investors?
Well, I think the biggest thing is being able to keep track of the investors, because in the beginning, when you have, just a couple dozen or maybe 100 investors, it's not that hard to keep track of. But, I wouldn't say we have a ton of investors, but right now we have just over, I think, a little over 500, maybe close to 600 active investors in our projects. But our number of investors that are actually on our list is right around 1,900. So it's not like we have a huge list of that, but that's 1,900 people that you got to keep track of. And, one of the things that we do is we keep track of our stats very closely and figure out the engagement rates of our investors. And, even our email newsletters that we send out, we have about a 56% open rate with those emails with those 1,900 people. And it's because, and if you know anything about email marketing, 56% is like phenomenal. Like people would die to get 56%, right? Most people in internet marketing are lucky to get like 10 or 15% open rates, and they would consider that a win. And so, but I still sometimes look at that and go, yes, but these are people that want my emails. They've reached out to us. We're getting, 75 to 100 new investor leads every month from our website. And so we're keeping track of a lot of those stats and making sure that, we can engage them. That's one of the reasons why we started our mailed newsletter, because we had, 45% of our investors that are not opening our email. So I look at it the other way. Like there's still 45% that are not opening it, and whether they're going to spam or they're just, deleting it or whatever happens. I don't know what happens sometimes, but we wanted to make sure we had another way to be able to reach out to them and be able to, inform them of different opportunities. And this is actually for those of you who are watching the video again, another brochure that we put together. We mailed this. This is actually the investment offering that we send to our investors. And every investor we have a mailing address for, they'll get a copy of this, express mailed to them whenever we have an offering available. And that way they can be aware, we can pretty much ensure that they're going to receive this versus missing an email and then missing out on the opportunity.
I love that you keep a track of the metrics. And a lot of people don't collect home addresses and they're just all email based. So yeah, that's another thing that I would recommend for people to implement, at least in their practice, if they're starting, collect the home addresses as well. Mm-hmm. Now, Dan, what do you do differently from other sponsors that benefit passive investors?
Sure. Well, I think one of the biggest things that we do is we're very transparent. We're always accessible. We're always open, and we try to over communicate. And to give you a quick example of that, we're still kind of in the middle of the COVID-19, hopefully on the tail end of it, but we're still in the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic. But when it first started, we knew we had some investors that were going to be a little bit, concerned about the situation, right? We didn't really know where. There's a lot of uncertainty. Nobody predicted it. Nobody would have been able to, underwrite for it or anything like that. But, we wanted to make sure we over communicated. So normally we send out monthly distributions and we do monthly updates on our properties based on the prior month. So, normally we're only updating them in arrears for the prior month. So if like right now we're recording this in June, our June update goes out it's the May update because it goes out by June 14th. So we're updating them on the prior month. Well, in April of this year, we decided that we're going to send out a weekly email every Monday and update the investors on exactly the performance of the property and how it was performing. And then we had so many investors reaching out saying, hey, no one else is doing this. This is awesome. I can't wait to invest with you again because I appreciate the transparency and the communication. And for us, it was helpful because we weren't getting a bunch of emails from all of our investors that were concerned. They already knew how the property was performing that entire month because we were updating them. And even throughout the whole process, the cash flows were very strong on our properties. And so far, we have not had to withhold distributions from our investors.
I love it. Always refining the communication process. I love that. Dan, I want to transition real quick before I usually complete the last 3 questions of this interview. I have some more questions from the Facebook community. It's a 400 people strong investors, passive investing community. And I just want to ask from Josh Cooper, how do you come up with unique but inexpensive ways to stand out? Not all can charter a plane to fly investors or rent a marching band. Where do you get these ideas? Now, real quick, before you answer that, let me set the table on that.
I was going to say.
So last year at one of the conferences, you flew a charter plane to the event. You also had a live marching band that you instructed the crowd to Facebook Live it. And I thought that was awesome. So that's set the table. Go ahead.
Yes. So what I would say is you have to figure out what other people are doing in other industries. And that's kind of what I like to do is I like to go to other industry conferences to kind of see what are other people doing. Like the idea for the marching band really wasn't my idea. I mean, I was actually at a conference and another speaker did it. And it had nothing to do with multifamily, that conference. But I saw him do it and I was like, that is awesome. I could do that, And it really, for that situation, it really wasn't that expensive. I made a like $1,000 donation to the booster club for that that camp, right? And it was in the middle of the summer that I did that. So it was actually kind of challenging to get those students to actually come out for that marching band, bit, but they did, but it also benefited the school at the same time. So that really wasn't that expensive. Now, as far as chartering the plane, yeah, that was definitely a little more expensive, but each one of the investors that came on that plane with me had already invested, and they've already invested more since then. So they've invested over 7 figures since we have had that plane flight. So, it's one of those things where you kind of have to balance when you're starting to do deals. You have a little bit more money to play with, but I will say that none of the types of things that I do my investors pay for. So what I mean by that is we don't charter planes and things like that and make the properties pay for it, right? So that all comes out of my pocket personally. But as far as finding other things, I think, Josh, you just have to look at what other people are doing in other industries and just, kind of figure out ways to stand out. And also figure out what people are doing right now in the industry for multifamily and just do something different than that, right? So that you can actually stand out. Like not very many people are doing these newsletters. And the ones that are usually doing like a basic newsletter, maybe 4 pages. This is the one I do is now a 12-page, high gloss, really great, really, really well written. We interview one of our investors and we really spend time on it, and the investors can see that. And so things like that make you stand out are important. And then one of the other things that I would suggest is, making sure that one of the things you can stand out with yourself is very easy is over communicate with your investors. And I have in my cell phone, I have every single one of our investors that I've talked to, and in the company name field, I put in there the actual city and state where that investor is located, so that when I'm traveling, I can actually type in that city and I can actually text them and say, hey, I'm coming to Las Vegas. I'm coming to LA. I'm coming to Dallas. Would love to meet up with you for a cup of coffee or lunch or dinner, and trying to have that more face-to-face and more, kind of relationship with those investors.
I hope he answered it for you, Josh. Now I got one more, last one from the community. Shalyn Hutchison. How do you run a successful virtual summit?
Well, that could be a whole other 1-hour podcast that we talk about, John. But I would say the biggest thing that you have to do is you have to get some really good, solid speakers that are willing to kind of come alongside you and support you. And you have to come alongside them and support them as well. And so, there's a lot of things that we do from a promotional standpoint that helps to promote the speakers so that they feel like they want to be able to help promote the actual event itself. And I also, try to make sure that's quality, right? I want to invite quality speakers, and I want to make sure I invite, a good kind of smattering of different speakers every single time as well. Because if I just did the same thing every single time, people would get bored with it, right? It's going to constantly change things up. But you'd be surprised that I don't pay any of those speakers to be there. So not one of them do I actually pay to be there. And every single one of them, we've had at least 40 speakers speak at the event. So obviously there's scheduling in the background going on, and there's coordination and things like that. But it's really not that complex when you break it down to the different components. But I do have a really good support team behind me that I delegate a lot of the tasks to, as far as scheduling and things like that. I know, John, you've been on it before, and so you kind of know some of the inner workings of how we actually work with that. But very little of that communication happens through me. Most of it's with my team, and they're handling a lot of that back end work and they actually work full time with me.
Yeah, and it was a great opportunity. It was awesome, and thank you for having me at that time, man. I loved it, man. Anytime.
Yeah. Well, I've actually already got your name slated to be invited for the January one, so you should hopefully be receiving an email from Stacy.
You heard it here first, PI listeners. One piece of advice for the PI listeners.
Wow. Well, it's hard for me to give you just one piece of advice, because other than I would say, if it was, you need to know the operators before you invest with them. So don't just go with an operator because they've provided you with some really good solid returns, just like that. Really get to know somebody. You got to build that relationship with them. But I actually, and this might be something that I can provide to your listeners. I have a PDF that I have that's called the 5 Red Flags for Passive Apartment Investors that I wrote about a month ago that I think would be very helpful to your investors. And it goes through 5 different things that I think are very important for passive investors to kind of think about before they actually invest with an operator.
I love it. Guys, go get it. Go get it. Now, how can we stay in touch with you?
Sure. So if you want to get access to that PDF, just go to our website, passiveinvesting.com, and fill out our investor questionnaire. And if we're a right fit for you, we'd be glad to be able to provide that to you. If you want to just email me, and do you do show notes, John? You do?
Indeed. Yes, we do.
Okay. Just don't include my email in the show notes, but I'll give you my email. It's dan@passiveinvesting.com. And the reason why I don't want it in the show notes is because if it's on a website, it gets expired and then I get a bunch of spam. But you can shoot me an email if you just want the PDF. Glad to just provide you the PDF too. You can just email me at Dan at passiveinvesting.com, and I can shoot you over that PDF so you can take a look at it.
Awesome. Now, this is my favorite question, and it's pretty obvious, but bear with me. What is the meaning behind your company name?
Well, the company name is passiveinvesting.com LLC. So a lot of people they're not usually confused as to what we do, right? But obviously we're reaching out to passive investors, and we get a lot of private equity groups that want to invest with us, but we have not needed them, and we're hoping we never do need them, because the whole purpose of our group is to be able to have investors, everyday investors just like ourselves, that don't usually have access to these large multifamily acquisitions. And our group acquires minimum 20 million upwards to 75 million in acquisitions, and so we want to make sure we have those types of investments available to the everyday investor. And so our average investment that our investors puts in is around $95,000. So if I was to average it out across our portfolio, and so we have a lot of smaller investors, and that's what we would prefer. I'd rather have a lot of smaller investors. We can pool our money together and to be able to acquire these assets.
Dan, I'm really grateful to have you on the show, man. We got to get you back. I love it. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, John.
Don't forget to download your free copy of the investment tracker. It allows you to track up to 5 investments, compare sponsors, markets, and most importantly, projected versus actual returns. To get your copy, go to www.projectedreturns.com. PI listeners, thank you for listening. As always, we hope this was the best resource for your investment strategy, but also the best use of your time. Remember, if this episode helps you, you can help us by leaving a review on iTunes. I hope you feel compelled enough to share it with someone you think this would resonate with as well. As much as it pains us to leave you, but you know what time it is. Time to go put this into practice. Till the next time we meet. Happy investing. PI listeners, I'm grateful for your time and I appreciate you for listening. It would mean the world to me if you went to iTunes and left a rating and written review. Let me know how you feel about the show. It really makes a big difference with getting the podcast out there. Don't forget about our Facebook group, where all of our guests are members of. I'll be there to answer any of your questions, or even questions you might have for future guests. Subscribe so you can get the latest episodes and our fan favorite quick hitters. Finally, I want to keep you updated, so head over to johnfortes.com and sign up for the newsletter. If you're interested in partnering with me, sign up on the contact page so you can talk to me directly. I look forward to connecting with you. Happy investing.